Welcome to the EDUCAUSE Rising Voices podcast, where we amplify the voices of young professionals in higher education. I'm Sarah Buszka, and I'm joined by my amazing, the incredible, the singular, the perfect co-host that we could ever have on the show, Wes Johnson. Yes. There it is. Yes. Hey, there we go. And we're members and friends of the EDUCAUSE Young Professionals Advisory Committee, also known as YPAC. So today's topic, I'm excited about. I say that about every topic, which is great because I'm excited to talk about all the things we do on the show. We're really thinking about cybersecurity and institutional resilience today. And the topic is timely and apropos, just given, well, frankly, everything that's been swirling around in 2026, but especially, I would say, for higher education, the recent Instructure Canvas LMS outage that impacted everyone globally. And I think from my lens, I'm typically seeing things from the higher education lens. However, this happened throughout K-12, throughout higher ed, frankly, anyone who's using this tool, right? And I think it's a very global and significant impact. And so I think for the show today, we're getting a little curious and we're seeing and trying to talk a little bit more about what does that impact actually look like and what are young professionals' roles in those types of impacts, whether it be the cybersecurity impact or even an institutional resilience strategy and planning too, right? So I think from the EDUCAUSE lens, we've heard a lot about how EDUCAUSE has responded to this incident, and I should say maybe EDUCAUSE member institutions specifically, but we really want to dig deep a little bit today and learn more about the broader lens and maybe what this looked like from a K-12 lens too. So with that, Wes, would you be willing to introduce our guests?
Absolutely. We will kick it off with Hannah McLarnon. Hannah is an analyst with 7 years of experience in cybersecurity across education, healthcare, and tech. She serves as a cybersecurity analyst and program manager at Baylor School, an independent 6 through 12 school in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I haven't said that word in a little while. Welcome, Hannah. And then we also have Amir Lawrence. Amir is a cybersecurity analyst from the Friday Institute at NC State University. Supports cybersecurity efforts for 200,000 North Carolina K-12 employees at over 300 plus public school units. He uses his background in both cybersecurity and psychology to lead various statewide initiatives focused on security awareness and skills training. Wow, 200,000. Shout out to you, Amir. It's great to have you both. Welcome to the show. And I'll stay on you, Amir. We're going to kick it off with maybe the most important question on the show. What is your superpower?
I think when I look at it, it's probably going to be that dual background in psychology and cybersecurity, or really just the humanities in general in cybersecurity, just because I think the field is really technical. But when you look at things like security awareness training, how people are affected and respond to like these incidents, the human is a really core part of it at every step of the process. So making sure you understand like the human mind and like why are people making the decisions they do and how are they affected by these like incidents that happen really helps inform how to better like serve them from like a leadership perspective.
Yeah, totally agree. That's a great superpower. And I want to jump on board and say that I went to school and did cybersecurity and sociology.
Oh, nice.
For a very similar connection. Yeah, for sure. Hannah,
I want to jump on board too because I studied psychology and neurobiology as part of my undergrad and Russian language and literature. So I agree. I think understanding the human side, like how human behavior works, the human brain, the human mind, a superpower. Absolutely. So we got, really great folks on the show. I'm biased, but.
Hannah, what is your superpower? And your major now. We got to put you on the spot.
Yeah.
My major was computer science. And I'm going to say something crazy. I took a couple psychology classes.
All right. There you're in there.
Getting a minor.
There we go. I love it. I knew it. Had a feeling.
Yeah. Great minds think alike, I think.
Absolutely.
As for a superpower, I would say that my passion for security is probably my biggest one. It's more something I'm compulsed to do is share my passion with others and try my best to make it relevant to them. make them excited about it. I try and make it relate to whatever is important to them. And anytime someone comes up to me with, I recognize the scam before it could get me, or I saw something strange, so I changed my password, which I get all the time. I feel just so excited that they recognize the importance of security and not only protected themselves, but are excited about it.
Awesome. Awesome. Do I note some musical passion as well with the guitars in the background?
More like trying to be.
Okay. Hey,
I love music. I'm trying to learn how to do it myself, but there's definitely
That's
some
awesome.
musical passion there.
That's awesome. A shared passion of mine as well.
And Amir too, because Amir plays guitar a little as well. Yes.
We're connected. The universe put
I know.
this episode together right here. Yeah, okay.
Well, actually, I want to pick up the thread of psychology for a moment. So I know I'm going a little off script here, but since we have these shared interests, I'm really curious to hear, maybe from you, Hannah, starting, and then Amir, if you're willing to pick it up. How do you use that psychology lens in your everyday work? Like, where does it come and show up? How do you bring it to bear? How are you leveraging that to move goals of your institution forward, especially with respect to security?
Well, I would say some of the greatest cyber threats are social engineering based. It's getting someone to trust you enough to give them information about you, or guessing what someone might do based on common human behavior. Anytime someone comes to me with, hey, I messed up, I clicked this link, hey, I talked to this person I shouldn't have and gave them too much information, I never blame them, because that's human nature. They prey off that. It's completely reasonable because they're expecting you to be human.
Right. Absolutely. Agree. Amir, what would you add to that?
I think my perspective, since I'm kind of dealing it from a more like a dispersed lens and like actually like in an individual district, is that what I see at least is that if you don't have a psychology sort of like background, or I guess a human-centric approach, you then kind of miss out on the fact that at least in K-12, it's not just the issue of people like doing the right thing, but you have to understand like what are their goals? What are the things they care about? And in K-12, it's not really technology or cybersecurity. It's teaching students. So then from like my perspective, it really plays its role in that when I talk to someone, it's not just, all right, hey, I need you to do this training. I need you to, avoid this phishing, but it's really like, okay, I want you to turn on MFA. You really don't want to. What can I say to you, and what was your reason, what's the friction point to not just make it this thing you have to do because your tech team says it, but you understand like, no, this is, this protects me, this protects my like community, it protects my home. I think just being able to really like connect with people at their actual pain points, and not, the perceived arbitrary, our IT team says we have to do X, Y, and Z. I think it gives you a bit of a finesse to how you approach it, which I think definitely proves valuable in like long-term engagement of like changing their behavior and their awareness of things.
Absolutely. I like how you frame that, like that finesse, right? Because sometimes I think for us who work in technology security, there's kind of this je ne sais quoi about it, right? To get users to actually do the things that would actually make them safer. And I think that's a great way to capture it, Amir, is that finesse. And I really think that psychology lens that at least that I'm hearing helps give you that.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So starting with you, Hannah, what is it like when that major incident hits on the ground? You get the call, major system's been compromised. We need to figure out what we need to do. What is it like on the ground for you?
Yeah. So that heavily depends on how prepared the organization is. Best practice in an ideal world, there is extensive documentation telling you exactly what you need to do. There's people's phone numbers, who exactly you need to call and when. There's step-by-step instructions with screenshots, locations on how to access these tools, backup people if that person isn't available at this time. And in an ideal world, these are practiced regularly in person. They call it disaster recovery training. It's extremely important. Unfortunately, the reality is that, especially in education, a lot of schools just don't have the resources to take care of all of that. ends up being long hours, juggling tasks, miscommunications, the destruction of evidence, increased cost, or recovery in general.
Mm-hmm. Amir, would you say anything different or add to that?
I think Hannah's spot on. For us, we try to prepare, the individual like school districts or public school units that we have with things like an incident response toolkit they can use that kind of helps them create the document, or like a cybersecurity program plan. But really, I think the big thing that sort of that distinguishes K-12 from higher ed is, like Hannah mentioned, it's like that lack of resources. But it's not just, when you say that, it's like the mind goes to money, but it's like, it's a lack of time, it's a lack of bandwidth, it's a lack of, understanding from leadership that, this is the importance of this issue, right? Because K-12 has different goals that it's going for. So for us, it's really a game of, all right, well, with this lack, what community resources or support can we provide to them that would then help support, recovering from this incident? And it's, it's really like calling in the cavalry. So it's really just a game of, getting all the right people there, seeing what support's needed, and just seeing, okay, where are you at right now? How bad is it? What's going on in your environment? How can we help support? But to really like focus on their goals, because maybe, they're just trying to make sure the kids can get through their school day, and they might not need to get the network on like right there today. They have different priorities. And I think understanding that really is sort of the crux of what's going on in K-12 after like a really big incident happens.
Yeah. Interestingly, I would say that if you spoke to most in higher ed, particularly on public side, they would probably share in your lack of resource concern and preparation in a lot of ways. Speaking on behalf of some public,
no.
We definitely share in that thread sometimes. And one of the interesting things, just to kind of go down that rabbit hole, some of the differences, because there's a lot of assumptions I imagine out there from both sides, is on the higher ed side of it, particularly for at least medium, larger, maybe even small. I haven't worked in many small institutions, but there's like a residential factor to it, in that your students live on the campus. Some of your faculty may also live on the campus. So there's kind of a crossing of lines, both professionally as well as like expectation. Yeah. Like if I can't access this thing because of some outage, I might not be able to access something for my real life. I'm curious, do y'all have that kind of dynamic, given that maybe your students and teachers don't live there, but they live in the nearby community? Yeah. Do you kind of see some of those things blend together in an incident in the way they view them?
You want to go first, Sam?
If you have something, go. Yeah, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think for us, for a lot of students, especially because we serve a lot of rural North Carolina. So for a lot of those students, right, school's going to be the only place where they get, access to the internet, or access to a laptop, or maybe even just a good meal and like stuff like that. So I think, due to the fact that over time schools have become more connected, right, and we have Wi-Fi in every classroom, and these like really cool developments, the schools then become sort of chained to having a network. So it is a broader impact. I could definitely see a through line between how college, higher ed has to focus on like, well, these students, like they run their lives from the campus. But for the students in K-12, like they might not have, to live there. But for a lot of those students, if they don't have the resources that they expect at school, then that radically not only affects them when they go back home, but then that kind of snowballs, because, well, if you have a student who doesn't get food at school for a couple of days, or, the school's down and they can't do their homework for a week straight, well, how do you shift the schedule? And it becomes this big sort of interconnected mess of like things failing, because, we need the network, we need the internet in some capacity to help run these things how we design them.
No, thank you for that. I never made that connection. Hannah, would you add anything to that?
Amir's spot on. So we are a K-12 institution, Baylor School, but we actually have students that live on campus as well as teachers.
Okay.
So life safety is 100% considered with risk, and critical infrastructure needs to be considered. In that, if there's a phone outage and there's something that happens on campus and people can't reach out because all phones are down, that brings up risk a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. I've never made those. Yeah.
Yeah. And I like the thread that we're picking up here too, because in one of my former lives, I used to lead critical infrastructure and cyber infrastructure services for the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And that was, disaster recovery, all the things that we're talking about here, top of mind. And I think one thing I'm hearing here from the K-12 lens is that same lens, in addition to cybersecurity, privacy concerns, risk writ large, applies in a K-12 setting, but it's very connected throughout the entire community too. And I think if I'm hearing this correctly too, y'all tell me if I'm wrong, it's difficult to understand where something stops and where it starts, right? If you have a community with students who are maybe living on campus, or maybe whose only point of connectivity to the internet or that good meal is their school, if a ransomware attack happens and school is shut down or they lose access to a certain resource, there's ripple effects throughout the community, right? Do you two see that too? I'm seeing nods. Amir, do you want to pick up on that?
No, yeah, I would definitely agree, and it's definitely something that I think goes unnoticed. But once you really just sort of think about it a bit more, I mean, even to what you mentioned about like critical infrastructure, just student safety, like for a lot of schools, their camera systems, their door systems, like you mentioned, their phone systems, but even obviously like payroll, like all those things are like hyper dependent on having a connection. And it's just this thing that, and ideally you'd want the community more involved. So it's kind of like a catch-22 where you want the community to be really involved. And you want, all these systems to sort of funnel in and out of the school, but you then create this sort of massive pillar, but also a failure point that if it is hit, are you prepared to pivot and find like a solution that still is, reasonable, but isn't diverting, again, the main focus of, all right, well, I have to make sure these kids walk across that stage in a few years. So how do we make sure we get back on track for that? But it's definitely just a process that schools have to figure out, what works best for them and their community, of course.
Right. Well, building on that, actually, I'm curious, maybe I'll ask you first, Hannah, and then back to you, Amir. Like, how do you do that, right? You just asked a lot of great questions, I think, which many folks, I think, would really benefit from hearing. So maybe, Hannah, like, how would you get your community on board to understand the risk better and how it impacts students in the community? And how do you kind of rally folks to kind of get on board and understand what's going on and how they might be able to be a part of the solution whenever an incident does happen?
Well, something that we're kind of trying to do a little more of is calling out when someone does something good. We had a situation at one point where one person reported an email and they reported it using our information button, and we did an investigation as normal, and other people had received the email. So we removed it and we sent out a communication to everyone saying, hey, we got their consent, of course. Hey, this person did a fantastic job. They did everything they needed to do and saved a lot of trouble for a lot of people because they reported that one email. Just a reminder, if you get an email and you identify it as phishing, please still let us know because other people may have gotten it. I had a lot of people come up to me afterwards and say, hey, thanks for that email. That was really informative, or showing me more emails that they saw. It was really effective, that positive praise that they received, just for being aware. See something, say something.
That's great. Yeah, you too can click the report phishing button also.
Exactly.
Kind of gamify it a little bit. I love that.
Exactly.
Yes. And I think, back to our kind of psychology comment, I think giving folks that recognition and praise publicly really helps reinforce the behavior that you want to see. What would you add for that, Amir? What are you folks doing?
No, yeah, I think, Hannah, again, spot on. I really love like all the through lines that are happening in the conversation. Anything around, spotlighting positive behavior, gamification, it goes a really long way. Primarily because, even for us in the field of cybersecurity, it's a very, doom and gloom. There's always an incident. There's always something happening. We're always preparing for something. So when you go even, down that to people who aren't really in the field, but they are affected by it, there's this like apathy that develops because it's like, okay, well, I don't really know what's happening. I don't really understand all the ins and outs of these acronyms you're throwing at me. And there's always something that I either have to like avoid clicking on something, or someone does click on something and you get to feel like it's kind of pointless. So like even in North Carolina, where I was like primarily working on for the past like years, like creating a statewide like cybersecurity ambassadors program. So it's like finding those people in the school districts who are, championing not only like the cybersecurity efforts, but they're displaying good behavior that we can then showcase and highlight, but also then connect them with their other peers, because maybe for me, I see the value here, but if we can say, hey, such and such in this county does X, Y, and Z, maybe you guys should connect and see what you can pull from that. There's just this really good sort of like synergy that develops where it becomes a community sort of effort, you know what I mean? And that comes from championing those people and making it a bit more fun. And I think going back to even like the original question of just how do you get people to really like understand, the importance of it all. It's just, for us, it's always been, connecting it to them, meeting them where they are, like at their level. So like, what are the things that you care about most? And, for leadership, it might be like, hey, you might think that paying this much money for the cybersecurity service, whatever, is, a waste of time. But if you get hit and the school goes down, that's going to be a really big hit to your reputation, for sure. Like just like the school's reputation in general, there's going to be a lot of, anger or frustration or confusion from parents and families, and you have to deal with that. That is a cost in a way that some would say is more than, the $100,000 for a tool or whatever the case is, right? So it's just helping them understand, the bigger picture of this prep might seem kind of moot. Everyone thinks insurance is dumb until you need to use the insurance. It's like, okay, this is really, really good. Or like that preparation, right? But even like to their families, right? It's like when you go home, you have dozens, if not hundreds of accounts. You have, accounts with the same password, because I did for a long time, right? I've gotten the whole like, oh, you have a password in 65 breaches. But it's like, okay, right? And it's like, okay, so
I've never had that. I'm guilty of it too.
So it's like, hey, so we know we all have this like this through line of our experience. So maybe don't view it as, IT team making me do dumb stuff for work, but it's like, no, this is something that you can take home and you can send it to your, this can help your partner, your parents, your kids, because, all of them are users to some capacity, and they all have, a digital footprint. And when you make it that salient, that tangible, it goes from being this, nebulous cloud to like, okay, I definitely see how I'm having that impact. So when you get into, reporting phishing, you see that it's not just a button that goes to the IT team, but it's like, no, I'm protecting my community. And that really makes it, something like solid.
Absolutely. I like how you highlighted the opportunity cost too, because I think it's so easy to think about things in terms of a dollar amount, especially I think in the environments that many of us operate in, public institutions that are, dealing with funding challenges often. So framing it as in terms of the opportunity cost, I really like, right? Because we always are trading off something. So That's great. Thank you.
So Amir, I'm going to stay on you for a second. We talked a little bit about, I like at least what I took from Hannah's framing and what you kind of carried with it is you kind of empowered the community in a way, like gave them some agency by highlighting someone who took an action and it had an immediate impact, which I think is great and something I'm going to take back to my own teams. But I'm curious for you. So has there been a moment that you realize like, hey, I actually have more power to influence my institution's cybersecurity posture than I thought originally? Like, has there ever been a moment where you were in a room and you realized they were all looking at you for the solution or the next step, or you had that opportunity to do something?
Yeah, actually, that's so. I've been at my current position for about 3 to 4 years now, but I'm the only person on my team who has like a humanities background. So what I'm noticing now, and I've noticed over the years, really, because we've been shifting towards, not shifting, but we're more so adding on a more human-centric approach to the technology that we already have. But in a lot of these rooms now, the conversation isn't more about, okay, do we need this firewall or that firewall? Do we need this antivirus? But it's more so, okay, we have all these tools, but people just aren't engaging. They don't seem to care. How do we make that happen? So that's where I'm kind of becoming the subject matter expert. I have been the subject matter expert, is because I think, again, going back to that original point that we were talking about earlier, Sarah, like the finesse, right? It's just like, how do you talk to someone who doesn't understand really what you're trying to get at? They think it's pretty dumb. You're trying to take away from the time I have to go teach these kids. It's interesting. I like it because I can't really explain some of the like techniques I take. Is more of just, it feels right. Like even in the sense of like, okay, when we are asking a school district to send out phishing emails, right, for like simulated phishing training, there's a lot of feedback of like, all right, people are coming and saying, all right, I have to teach, 50 kids this subject, and you're asking me to like do this training, and you're trying to trick me and fish me and get me to click these bad links. So it's like, okay, maybe let's sit them down and see where they're coming from, but then like let's actually have them work through some of the simulated phishing emails, so they can spot the red flags and talk to them there. And, they might be like, why don't we just, mandate this, and if you don't do the training, you get kicked off the network. And it's like, okay, you can use the stick, but the carrot will be a lot more smooth, and people won't be angry at you, and they'll believe in it, and they actually will want to do better. And that again goes back to, bringing in the community, because, I might not know what the right incentive or explanation is for a teacher, because I'm not a teacher, but if I can find a teacher who does care about cyber and has that insight, I can put them on that platform, and then I get to step back, and we still get the growth we need, but you don't end up with this sort of, big brother is making me do cybersecurity. It's like, no, this is, it's for us, it's by us.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great. What about you, Anna? Ever had that moment, or anything to share on that? Anything to
add? Definitely what I mentioned earlier about people really are responding well to this, regarding calling people out for their good work.
It sounds like you've had a lot of opportunities and situations where you really have influenced a lot of your institutional strategy for resilience. And I'm hearing that from Amir too. So as I'm kind of switching gears a little bit here, because I think I've heard a lot of great examples, maybe I'll ask you, Amir, first, and I'll go back to you, Hannah. If we have another audience member who's listening, who's in a similar situation as you are right now, in similar place as you are in your careers, is there any even smallest piece of advice that you can give them that they could take even in one day to have some institutional impact in terms of institutional resilience? What would you recommend?
What I'd say is the biggest thing really is to always be fighting that voice in your head that's kind of the imposter syndrome that's sort of telling you that maybe, especially for me, because I came right out of college into this role, so it's there have been conversations, and going back to your last question, there have been meetings where I hear what's going on, I hear leadership talking about what they should do, and I'm like, okay, this seems like we're really overcomplicating it, and if we just did X, Y, and Z, we kind of be right where we need to go. But I've intentionally muted myself because well, I'm new here, or I don't have the 20 or 30 years of experience to do that. But I think really the beauty of having young people in these spaces, these conversations now, especially right now, is that young people have a very unique perspective on the world due to going through not only university during the time we did with at least for me with COVID and things like that, but then when you just see this is a people issue, and as a student or a former student, right, you're closest to what it's like to not understand cybersecurity, right? So for me, I'm thinking about it as, okay, if it was 5 years ago and I had no idea about all this technical jargon I have to understand now, and a business continuity plan, an IR tabletop, and this and that, it's okay, well, what do I do to get to that person, right? And I think that's such a unique thing, because I can tell even now it's happening to me. I think it's a natural occurrence that, not you get jaded, but you just become engrossed in the work and you forget kind of who you're serving, right? And I think even especially because I do a lot of work with higher ed, even though I'm not serving higher ed heavily, there's still this ivory tower of sorts that we forget that we're in, because we're able to work and be in higher ed and serve in these spaces. So when you're dealing with rural communities where, again, people have, this school is all they have, they are being severely underpaid and they are severely overworked. So I shouldn't be coming at you all heavy and top down with all this rah, 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 rah. I should approach you from, all right, well, I was in college and I get this kind of confusing and it doesn't seem like it makes that much sense. But when you get past that imposter syndrome, you really get to showcase, your unique perspective, and that diversity and perspective and voice is really kind of what pushes us forward towards, a more long-standing cybersecurity culture that's a bit more holistic to all the population we'll be serving, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really important point that I just want to double click on, because I think imposter syndrome, and I'm speaking from my own personal experience here, is real. And I think especially for being a young professional in a career and in a setting where many of your peers are a decade or two your senior, and you're the only one in the room who might be in the age range of 20s, having recently graduated from college. I think it's a natural, according to, human behavior, it's a natural and easy kind of lens to start keeping on often, which is that imposter syndrome, and walking into spaces and feeling like, oh, something like I don't belong. And so I don't really have something to add here because there's someone who has 20, 30 years experience. So what value could I possibly add? I think it's very easy to say that to ourselves. And, some of the easiest lies to believe are the ones we tell ourselves, right? And so you made a really good point of, no, actually, I do have value here. Everyone else does too. That is all valid. And since I'm so close to this population that I am serving, having just stepped over the line here, how can we look at that as a strength and see that I'm a bridge here too, and that we can create more of this holistic experience because of that, not in spite of it. So thank you for bringing that up. I think it's a really important point that young professionals and professionals of any age experience and go through. And I like that we're talking about it because it's important. So switching gears to you, Hannah, we're kind of like rounding out the show here, talking about some advice, but if you had a young professional staff member who is listening or even on your team and really wants to influence institutional resilience strategy, cybersecurity, privacy, what is the smallest next step that you would suggest for them to take that would be realistic, that would lead to some type of impact?
I think my number one advice to young professionals everywhere in all fields really is ask questions. If you are lost, do not be afraid to ask a dumb question. I ask so many dumb questions all the time. And I've never had anyone get angry with me for wanting to know more. I've only had people be excited to share. And if it that is what kind of helps me overcome imposter syndrome, is putting my knowledge out there, my level of knowledge, and just leaning on my willingness to learn. If I'm feeling like I don't belong somewhere, I lean more on my desire to be somewhere rather than, am I trying to fit in? No, I'm trying to learn. But aside from that, I would say if a young professional is trying to be in tune with security and be prepared, read up on any incident response or disaster recovery documentation that your organization has. Being prepared is the number one thing you can do in a high stress situation. Like we mentioned earlier, unpreparedness results in quite a bit of chaos. So it'll make it a lot easier for you if you know what to do in advance.
Absolutely. Because then you end up being able to tell other people what to do because you're prepared and rehearsed, right? And I think
exactly.
That there's a little ripple effect there. Yeah.
And I do have one more thing. Oh, sorry.
No, I was going to add on to your point, but yeah, go on. You're going.
Go ahead, Hannah.
Sorry. Community is super underutilized. It is one of the most important parts of developing as a young professional. And also one of the underutilized parts, especially in this day and age where most people are working remote and kind of isolated. But there's so much you can learn from others that can make learning things you don't know a lot more manageable. I would encourage any young professionals to get involved with a community-specific organization or information exchange, such as K-12-6 or EDUCAUSE. They've been incredibly valuable to us in the K-12 sector. And I encourage making friends in your industry and just continuing that communication flow.
Absolutely. Shout out to EDUCAUSE, obviously, especially the YPAC and Young Professionals Community Group. It's a great place to do that and take that next step.
Absolutely.
Amir, what would you add as a final closing thought for us?
Yeah, I think Hannah dropped a lot of really great gems there. Especially on the topic of, going out and reading up on things and preparing yourself. I think to take that a bit further, for me, it was really an issue of finding your passion within cyber. I think that's kind of the beauty of it, is that cyber is so diverse in where it can apply in the field, right? So for me, with the psychology background, I found, a true passion in like security training and just being on the human side of things. But I think once you are able to find that passion, it makes it a lot easier to then be a bit proactive about learning more and speaking up, because then you actually want to do that extra step. And that goes right into Hannah's other point about just with that community, right? that validates your perspective that, you know, for me, feeling like I was the only person who really cared about the humanities and like the people of it all. But then, you know, going to the EDUCAUSE conference and talking to all the professionals there and really explaining what I'm doing about security training. It's like, okay, I'm not, you know, this black sheep on my team who's just trying to be super, you know, lovey-dovey in humanities. It's like, no, this is a very big space, and there's a lot of cool like research and science and like practical things you can do there. And I just think, you know, whatever that is for you, that'll be sort of the gateway to then you finding your own path, because it really is going to be everyone's own path. There's no magic bullet. It's just at least taking that first step to say, all right, well, I want to do something here. I just got to figure out what it is and how much I care about it. And once you do find that, you're really off to the races.
There we go. Mic drop moment. For both of you, actually, a compounded mic drop moment. Thank you for sharing your advice.
Well, Hannah, Amir, we are just so thankful for y'all joining and sharing your knowledge and perspective on this. I've taken a couple of gems away to bring back to my team. So thank you for that as well. We are the EDUCAUSE Rising Voices podcast, and we will see you on the next episode.